Kaiba cheats a lot, like a whole lot. Like here, or here, or here, or here. Everyone knows that Yugi cheats, but what if I told you after going through 224 episodes and 2 movies, I've realized that Kaiba deserves the reputation that Yugi gets for cheating just as much, if not more.
That's against the rules, isn't it? Screw the rules, I have money.
As for all of his bravado and self-proclaimed skill, Kaiba has an almost impressive track record of breaking the rules to get there. And unlike Yugi, he's even cheated numerous times outside of the game. As it turns out, being an active participant in the tournament he also runs is a slight conflict of interest. So I thought it'd be fun to do the most comprehensive breakdown of every single duel where Kaiba cheated, from every illegal move, contradiction, or just borderline illegal action Kaiba makes. So let's find out. Is Kaiba really that skilled of a duelist? Or did he just cheat his way into second place? But before we dive in, we need to first define our ground rules for a cheat. And if you'd like, you can pause here if you want to read them. But the most important thing is that some of these are a bit subjective. So if you disagree, make sure to let me know in the comments. We'll start off with the controversial move where after Kaiba beats Grandpa Yugi, he rips apart the 4th copy of Blue Eyes, leaving himself to be the only person who possesses 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons. This moment gives us a good way to define our rules properly. This won't be counted as a cheat, even with how unethical it is. While it would have counted as a case of Kaiba altering the actions of a duel in his favor if he didn't own the Blue Eyes, but at this point he had 1 Blue Eyes fair and square, which meant that anything Kaiba did with Blue Eyes past this point was fair game, even if it was because he was afraid of anyone potentially using it against him. This doesn't mean that actions outside of the duel don't count as cheating though, as if Kaiba attempted to steal Blue Eyes before his duel against Grandpa, and then rip it in fear of anyone using it against him, this would be undoubtedly count as cheating. Regardless, it's not like Kaiba doesn't cheat in this episode at all. And no, it's not Kaiba summoning Blue Eyes White Dragon without tributes. Another thing you'll need to remember is that while it looks like Kaiba cheats when he summons Blue Eyes without tributes, at this point in the show, duels use a different set of rules than you might be familiar with, which include that tributes aren't required and you can't attack directly. While it doesn't come up in this duel, in the Duelist Kingdom arc, a lot of the rules function similar to D&D, where if you can make a compelling enough argument for why something should happen, then it ends up happening. For example, in Kaiba's duel against Joey in Duelist Kingdom, Flame Swordsman attacks Battleox, but Battleox has resistance to fire. Since Battleox is wearing armor, it's somewhat conceivable that it works like this. But before we get into the rest of his cheats, this video is brought to you by JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Spirit, launching worldwide on August 13th. I've been obsessed with JoJo's for a while now, and what's exciting to me about Golden Spirit is how you get to build an entire team of JoJo characters that you wouldn't normally get to see interact from different parts. Personally, my favorite is Part 5, so it's getting to see Giorno and Dio on the same team. And speaking of Part 5, recognize this song? Well, that's composed by none other than Yugo Kanno, and he's also the composer behind Golden Spirit's main theme, so let's check out. So we got a couple of previews to check out. I mean, I know the animations are really cool, but the soundtrack is really good. Okay, we got Purple Haze fighting the Part 5 gang. I think I could just watch JoJo characters pose all day. I mean, everything about this game is just speaking to me. So I highly recommend you go check out Golden Spirit by pre-registering either on iOS or Android, and help contribute into the final stretch of milestone rewards, where you can even unlock an SR Joseph Joestar. Links in the description. Now, back to the video. But even with that in mind, there is one time where Kaiba cheats in this duel, and that's when Yugi activates Swords of Revealing Light, which means that every monster in Kaiba's field cannot attack for 3 whole turns. But on Kaiba's turn, he then summons Judge Man and destroys Rude Kaiser, and then on the following turn, he summons Blue Eyes and destroys Dark Magician. While you could argue this is how Swords of Revealing Light works in this episode, the problem is that every other time we see it being used, Swords of Revealing Light never works like this, as even if the opponent summons monsters after it, it's still constrained by the effects of Swords of Revealing Light.
And I summon Alpha, the Magnet Warrior.
You forget about my Swords of Revealing Light? You can't attack!
Moving on to Duelist Kingdom, in Yugi's duel against the fake Kaiba, Kaiba's never actually dueling here, he still gets a real cheat here. Because partway through the duel, the bootleg Kaiba's copy of Blue Eyes starts slowly losing attack points. The cheat comes from how this only happens because the real Kaiba uploads a weirdly specific virus to the fake Kaiba's Blue Eyes. Now, slowly decreases its attack, which, you know, at that point I would have just assumed it would have been easier to just self-destruct the Blue Eyes or just change the attack to 0 completely. But apparently Kaiba prefers his sabotage montage with a bit of narrative tension. While Kaiba is an active participant of the duel, he's still directly influencing the outcome of the duel in favor of Yugi, so that's a +1. And in Kaiba's rematch against Yugi, I'm going to be counting 2 cheats. In this duel, Kaiba summons Sword Stalker and it gains a 5th of the attack of a monster from Kaiba's grave. Even if we try to approve this using the D&D rules of Duelist Kingdom, it still feels particularly egregious, given that there isn't even a justification for this effect happening. Kaiba just states that this is how the card works.
The Sword Stalker gathers the life force of a fallen ally, raising his own attack power by 20%.
For example, as far stretched as it is, Mammoth Graveyard working on debuffing Blue Eye's Ultimate Dragon is a valid play, given that Mammoth Graveyard is a pile of bones and it's fusing with a living monster. But that still means that things have to make sense, as you can't just say, I give this monster a million attack points, which is more in line with what Kaiba did here. Sword Stalker is a normal monster with no effect, so we'll be counting this as a cheat. The next play we need to go over is the controversial Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon fused with Mammoth Graveyard, as when Yugi fuses Ultimate Blue Eyes with Mammoth Graveyard, it causes Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon to lose 1200 attack each turn. But that's not even the craziest part, as when Celtic Guardian attacks Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, only one head of Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon is destroyed, because the dragon is a fusion of 3 monsters, and each head independently carries the same attack as the whole. The next turn, Kaiba activates Monster Reborn and summons Blue Eyes White Dragon, still attached to the Ultimate Dragon, and ultimately ends up attacking for game with that revived Blue Eyes. Okay, I know that's a whole lot to go over, but in the normal game after Celtic Guardian attacks into Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, it would have been destroyed and cleared by the field. Destroying a single head isn't how the card, or let alone any fusion, works at all. None of the other fusions in Duelist Kingdom gets partially destroyed, and Ultimate Dragon appears to be the only case of this happening. The difficulty in calling it a cheat though, is that there doesn't seem to be too much of an advantage of making the fusion function this way, as technically Kaiba would have been safer if Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon was just flat out destroyed. Like I mentioned before, direct attacks aren't allowed, so the fact that the weakened Ultimate Dragon was left on the field was actually a detriment to Kaiba, as it meant that Yugi now had a way to attack Kaiba's life points. So if Ultimate Dragon was fully destroyed, it would have meant that Yugi couldn't have attacked at all. And it's not like the Ultimate Dragon staying on the field would have helped him either, with the follow-up play by using Monster Reborn, as the Monster Reborn Blue Eyes that was attached to Ultimate Dragon could have just been summoned on its own, and still won Kaiba the game. So I don't really think I can call any of these plays cheats, even if they barely make sense and they still place Kaiba in a worse off position. But for this next move, I think it's fine to call it a cheat, as when Yugi's about to attack and win a game, Kaiba pulls off this little maneuver.
他のマス目一つを俺のライフポイント100とさ失ったポイント分のマス目の数だけ遊戯貴様のカードで俺の首をかき切れ
Pulling a reverse though to your god so you can win a card game counts as cheating, no matter how you spin it. Also, I just want to point out, later on in Battle City, Kaiba makes the egregious claim about how Yugi couldn't even beat Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, which is weird, when the only reason Kaiba even won was he literally threatened to kill himself. These videos take a lot of work and energy to make, so if you're enjoying the video and want to help support the channel, why not subscribe? And if you want to go an extra step further, why not check out my Patreon, where I'll be posting previews of upcoming videos, and you can also get your name in the credits of future videos. The next duel is Pegasus' duel against Kaiba, where Pegasus is running Toon monsters, which allows any Toon monster Pegasus controls to be unable to be attacked by a non-Toon monster. To counteract this, Kaiba uses Shadow Spell, which not only decreases the attack of Blue Eyes Toon Dragon, but also lets his own Blue Eyes attack and destroy it. The only potential problem with this play though, is that the card doesn't specifically mention any effect that could bypass Toon monsters' unattackable effect. So instead, we're defaulting to seeing if the D&D rules make much sense here, which they very much do, as we see Toon monsters dodge attacks or ducking out the way, so a spell which can lock them in place so they can no longer dodge makes enough sense. That's basically it for Duelist Kingdom, so we'll move on to Battle City, where now the rules are more formally defined, somewhat. So now we don't have to deal with D&D rules or spend time trying to explain how Kaiba can Monster Reborn part of Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. There's still a couple weird quirks of the rules of this arc, which we'll tackle when they get relevant, so we'll start with Kaiba's duel against Loomis and Umbra. In this duel, Kaiba only cheats one time, and that's in the final turn of the duel when he activates Soul Exchange, which lets him tribute his opponent's monster as if he was their controller, and tributes Alpha the Magnet Warrior, Beta the Magnet Warrior, and Gamma the Magnet Warrior to summon Obelisk. The issue of this play is that when Kaiba activates Soul Exchange, Massive Restrict was on a field, which prevents cards from being tributed. Now the argument Kaiba attempts to make is,
as long as these rare hunters have Mask of Restrict in play, I can't sacrifice anything. But I plan to sacrifice your monsters instead, Loomis.
Except that's not how the card works at all. Because if we look at the specific card text, it says cards cannot be tributed. There's nothing at all that would imply that the card prevents only you from tributing your own monsters. It's as clear cut as it can get in terms of preventing every form of tributing. But to be fair to Kaiba, honestly everyone in this duel is ignoring Mask of Restrict. Yugi ignores it by tributing his Magnet Warriors to summon Valkyrie on a Magnet Warrior. Umbra also ritual summon a Masked Beast, which surprise surprise still requires you to tribute monsters from the field or hand. Next up is Kaiba's duel against Ishizu, and here he cheats a total of 3 times. There's a weird play Kaiba makes where during Ishizu's turn, he activates Soul Exchange, which lets him tribute 3 of Ishizu's monsters to tribute summon Obelisk. That cheat doesn't come from Kaiba using a spell during Ishizu's turn. Activating spells during your opponent's turn is actually allowed in Battle City. The cheat comes from how he uses Soul Exchange, as Soul Exchange doesn't grant you the ability to tribute summon immediately after the card is activated. There's nothing on the card that implies that. In fact, all it does is give you the option to tribute monsters controlled by your opponent, not that you get to immediately tribute summon a monster during your opponent's turn. So Kaiba summoning Obelisk counts as a cheat. The other 2 cheats occur at the end of the duel, where Kaiba declares that he's going to attack with Obelisk, but because of main character powers, he gets a vision to use Blue Eyes White Dragon to attack instead. So he then tributes Obelisk for Blue Eyes and attacks for game. And I'm choosing to count this as 2 cheats. For starters, he's clearly using information outside of how he normally would have played, which ultimately led him to win. Sure, it was an out of his own volition that the Millennium Rod gave him this information, but he still chose to use it regardless. The other, it comes with how the phases work. When he declares Obelisk to attack, it means that he's in this battle phase, but he then retracts his attack, which he obviously can't even do. Then goes to his main phase 2 to summon Blue Eyes, and then somehow manages to go into the second battle phase to attack for game. None of this is legal at all, given that you don't get more than 1 battle phase in a turn. In context, these aren't the worst cheats, given that his opponent quite literally could read the future. But cheat is still a cheat regardless of context, so that's an extra point to Kaiba. Now, in the semi-finals duel against Yugi, Kaiba cheats a total of 2 times. Yugi activates Light Force Sword, which banishes a card from Kaiba's hand for 3 turns, and is returned on a 4th turn. And surprise surprise, it turns out to be Obelisk. The cheat comes from when Kaiba gets Obelisk back, which happens to be on the 3rd turn, not the 4th. This directly contradicts not just the card text, but also how it was previously portrayed. As in Yugi's duel against the Seeker, 3 turns had passed, but the Seeker still didn't get the card banished from Light Force Sword. The next is when Kaiba summons Ixie's Dragon Cannon, and then attacks with it on the same turn it's summoned. As per Battle City rules, fusion monsters cannot attack the same turn they're summoned, so as Kaiba attacked with a fusion monster, this could count as a cheat. While there could be an argument made for this card being different, given that's a contact fusion, and isn't necessarily the same as a normal fusion summon, ultimately I'm still going to count it as a cheat. There isn't anything that would suggest contact summoning is inherently different from normal fusion summoning, and the rules literally are, fusion monsters cannot attack the turn they are summoned, so I can't really give Kaiba the benefit of the doubt here. The next play we need to go over is when Yugi attacks with Slifer the Sky Dragon, but Kaiba activates Interdimensional Matter Transporter. This negates Slifer's attack as Ixie's Dragon is removed from the field and Slifer no longer has a valid target. If you're familiar with the real life TCG rules, this would have caused a replay in an actual game where Slifer could attack and then Yugi could have won the game. But per the Battle City rules, whenever the target of an attack disappears, this counts as negating an attack. So it's a valid enough play, and actually isn't a cheat. Another weird hiccup we see is when Kaiba summons Obelisk by only tributing 1 card, which is Ixie's Dragon Cannon. Again, this was a weird Battle City rule, as fusion monsters count as the number of tributes used for its fusion summon, so again, this was a fine play. Next duel we need to discuss is Kaiba's duel against Joey. This is probably one of the worst cheats in context of what the stakes are, as Joey and Kaiba are essentially dueling to see who's better. And in a duel when Joey manages to activate Time Wizard's effect, which turns his baby dragon into Thousand Dragon, and then its effect should have either blown up or reduced the attack of Blue Eyes. I don't really know, the anime never really seems to make up its mind. Either way, Kaiba responds by activating Interdimensional Matter Transporter to let Blue Eyes dodge Time Wizard's effect, and returns it to the field unscathed. So where's the cheat, you might ask? Well, it's a bit more complicated to explain. The first is that Interdimensional Matter Transporter, per its anime effect, returns to the field during the end phase, not immediately after, which we can see in Kaiba's duel against Yugi in just 11 episodes episodes prior. So looking at the sequence of events, which aren't 100% clear, we have two scenarios, where after Kaiba activates Interdimensional Transporter, Joey just ends his turn for no reason. And then Blue Eyes returns to his field at the end of the turn, which would have been 100% legal, but most likely wasn't the case, as if Joey had attacked with Thousand Dragon, then he would have won the duel on the spot. You might also be thinking, isn't Thousand Dragon a fusion card, so it couldn't attack? Well, in the anime, Thousand Dragon actually isn't a fusion, and we see in Joey's duel against Esperoba that Thousand Dragon attacks on the same turn it's summoned, so we have clear evidence that Joey could have attacked and won the duel, which then leaves us with the second scenario, that Kaiba used Interdimensional Transporter to return Blue Eyes to the field, immediately after Time Wizard's effect was used, instead of the end phase, which is straight up just not how it works. So in either scenario, either Joey forgot that he could attack with Thousand Dragon, which seems a lot more improbable, or Kaiba cheated and pretended Interdimensional Transporter had different effect.
You may depend on luck to win your duels, but I depend on my skills. That's the difference between us.
And Kaiba, you rely on bending the rules to win. In Kaiba's duel against Lecter, there's only one cheat, and that's when Spear Dragon attacks into Cyberjar. He deals 1400 damage, which is 400 more damage than should have been dealt, considering the difference in Spear Dragon's attack and Cyberjar's defense is 1000. It doesn't make a difference to the outcome of the game, but still is a case of Kaiba fudging the numbers for an advantage. In Kaiba's second duel against Alistair, there's only one cheat, and that's when Kaiba activates the effect of Ixie's Dragon Cannon.
I give up one of my cards, so I can automatically destroy one of your cards.
He's supposed to discard 3 cards to destroy 3 of Alistair's cards, but he's only shown to discard 1 single card. And that's all we have for cheats in the original anime, and it's a bit of an underwhelming one. But unluckily for Kaiba, we still have 2 whole movies to go through. In Pyramid of Light, there's 1 solid cheat, with a couple ones that are in a grey area. Starting with the most obvious of these is when Kaiba activates Deck Destruction Virus, a trap card which can be activated when a Dark Fiend type monster is destroyed as a result of battle. Then send 10 random cards from your opponent's deck to the grave. The issue is that he activates this with Pet in the Dark Clown, which isn't a fiend, it's a dark spellcaster. Now, there's also a couple cases we need to discuss that aren't as clear. The first is when Blue Eye Shining Dragon is summoned, Kaiba states that this monster gains 300 attack for every dragon monster in his grave, so he gives Shining Dragon 1500 attack. The issue is that he doesn't just have 5, he has 6 dragons in his grave, as he's ignoring Paladin of White Dragon, which is a dragon monster. I won't be counting this one as a cheat though, because just like in Duelist Kingdom, this actually works against Kaiba's favor, as when Kaiba attacked Yugi with Blue Eye Shining Dragon, he would have won a game if he had the correct attack points. If it was the other way, where Kaiba miscounted and Shining Dragon ended up with extra attack, this would have been a cheat. But luckily for Kaiba, this wasn't the case. The other grey area is Kaiba's entire plan of the gods. Starting with Pyramid of Light, it's a card that seemingly bypasses the gods' immunity to trap cards and just straight up banishes the gods from the field, which contradicts Kaiba's own line about the gods being unaffected by traps.
I'm afraid that your weak trap card won't work.
But this card does seem to be a bit more unique than your typical card, given that it's boosted by some sort of ancient Egyptian powers. Because it's clearly implied that the Pyramid of Light has some kind of out of duel property that can somehow circumvent the god's immunities. Even if going by the card text, the play doesn't make a lot of sense. Another issue we need to bring up is Kaiba's idea of how he was going to win. He plans to use Return from a Different Dimension to special summon the gods that were removed from play. However, this isn't how Return from a Different Dimension works. It only special summons your own monsters that have been removed from play, not your opponent's. So unless Kaiba's planning to cheat, this move wouldn't have worked. To prove this point even further in the official novelization of the book, we get to see Kaiba's deck. There's absolutely nothing in there that suggests Kaiba would have been able to resummon Egyptian gods again. Even with that all being said, a theoretical cheat isn't a cheat. And as Kaiba didn't actually manage to go through with this action, we can't count it as one, regardless of how incorrect Kaiba was in making this play. Moving on to the second movie, Dark Side of Dimension, despite it having some of the most consistent rulings we see for the anime, it still doesn't mean Kaiba is free from cheating. And honestly, it's my favorite case of cheating in the entire anime. But to get the easy one out of the way, Kaiba attacks with his crystal dragons, but both of their attacks get blocked. So Kaiba then uses both of their effects to add 2 Blue Eyes White Dragon to his hand. He then Dimension summons Blue Eyes Alternative Dragon, and then attacks again. Similar to his duel against the Shizu, Kaiba is using 2 battle phases, as for him to Dimension summon Alternative White Dragon requires him to leave the battle phase. enter main phase to dimension summon a monster, then re-enter new battle phase to attack. There also isn't anything on the card that implies it's a quick effect, nor is it ever implied that dimension summoning lets you summon during a battle phase, so this is a pretty clear-cut cheat. But by far the most blatant cheat I've seen in anything in the entire anime is this next one. As in the same duel, where out of nowhere, when Kaiba's about to lose, he straight up just puts his hand onto the ground, materializes a card out of thin air, which happens to be Obelisk. There's so much going on with this one move, I don't even know where to begin. In Dark Side of Dimensions, Kaiba didn't even have Obelisk. Hell, Obelisk as a card didn't even exist anymore. So he essentially had just materialized a card out of thin air. Even accounting for ancient Egyptian magic, this is still obviously a form of cheating. Kaiba not only stacked his draw, but made up a card out of nowhere that didn't even exist. It's even bounds beyond anything Bandit Keith did. So that's basically every single time I could find Kaiba cheating in an anime. But you might be looking at the length of the video and seeing that there's more to go through. And would you be surprised if I told you there's even more cheating going on? Because within Battle City, Kaiba isn't just running the tournament, he's also competing in it, which itself comes with so many conflicts of interest. For example, every participant has a full record logged on the system, and their entire decks, which Kaiba all has access to, giving him a massive advantage in potentially prepping his deck for the tournament. I mean, Yugi even acknowledges how blatantly unfair this is.
To ensure that only the best duelists enter, Mr. Kaiba has gone to great lengths to learn everything about you and your decks.
Everything? Knowing every card in our decks gives an unfair advantage to Kaiba.
So with this in mind, we need to go for the entirety of the Battle City structure to see where Kaiba might have potentially gave himself an advantage. So here's the standard I've decided to use for what counts as a cheat. Anytime Kaiba neglects his duty as an organizer or abuses his resources as the organizer of Battle City to gain an advantage for himself as a competitor, it'll be counted as a cheat. For example, despite Battle City being flooded with violent bloodthirsty 30-year-old men trying to battle children, and Kaiba not choosing to disqualify any of them, this doesn't count as a cheat. It isn't something that gives Kaiba an advantage as a competitor, it just makes him an awful tournament organizer. So starting off, we'll need to discuss Kaiba Corp having access to every duel's deck before the entire tournament. And despite what I alluded to earlier, I don't think I can really count this as a cheat. As to give Kaiba the benefit of the doubt, there isn't anything to suggest that Kaiba himself actively pulls out the deck list before he faces off against the duelist, which if he was, would definitely count as cheating. But it seems to be more of a case of Kaiba Corp the company keeping a record of the duelists without Kaiba looking at it. It is still shady behavior given how Kaiba has access to this information. But without there being specific proof that Kaiba abused this database, I can't really count it as a cheat. That being said, there are still plenty of other ways Kaiba abuses his vast oversight of the tournament, which is his ability to monitor the duels of the entire tournament, along with the location of every duelist. And while it's not illegal to simply spectate the duels of a tournament, there's a huge step between happening to spectate a duel in person, which is 100% legal, and having the ability to constantly monitor key opponents who are dueling at any time. We see Kaiba watching the entirety of Yugi's duel against the Seeker. This is the first duel we see in the entirety of Battle City, and it's probably one of the most egregious oversights Kaiba has as a tournament organizer. Because within this one duel, there's multiple times where Kaiba should have disqualified Yugi's opponent, but didn't, as the Seeker hacked his way into becoming a participant, cheats by using marked cards, and has fraudulent copies of Exodia. And it even gets worse, because when Mokuba tries to disqualify the Rare Hunter, Kaiba stops him, just so he can watch Yugi lose to the Rare Hunter.
Give me one reason why I shouldn't bust that cheat out there.
Because I need him. Besides, I can't wait to see Yugi squirm when he faces the same Exodia he used to defeat me.
And that's not even mentioning how Kaiba gains an advantage by learning about Yugi's new Battle City deck. All this to say, it's a pretty clear case of cheating, as Kaiba's actively letting a duelist continue that has broken the rules, who can potentially knock out one of his biggest threats. So with that in mind, I'm going to give it 2 cheats. One from not kicking out the Seeker, and the second for spectating Yugi's duel to gain an upper hand over Yugi's deck. There's also the matter of Kaiba abusing his powers to constantly monitor where the god cards are. I think this lies in the category of cheating, given that he's exploiting the fact that he owns the tournament infrastructure, which tells him the location of where every duelist is. The important reason at how this gives him an advantage is that with the ante rule means that you can potentially grab a god card if you win a duel against a god card owner. But for every other normal competitor, they are just relying on blind luck into stumbling into Slifer. But Kaiba will instantly know the second a god card appears, walk towards whichever duelist holds one and then force the match to ante for it. We see this exact scenario happening when Yugi faces off against Strings. The moment Slifer is summoned, Kaiba immediately heads straight to their location, and as soon as it ends, he's there to snipe Yugi for a duel over Slifer. You could also even argue that Kaiba again gets an advantage of learning how the god cards work and their effects and weaknesses, which no one normally else would have access to. And in a similar scenario, again, Strings doesn't even seem to be an actual participant, which means that again, Kaiba has legal grounds to disqualify him, but chose not to for the chance to get a god card, and also get insight into how to beat Slifer, which like I said, no other duelists would have access to unless they stumbled onto the duel through blind luck. So like before, I'm going to be giving Kaiba 2 cheats. One for not disqualifying Strings, and the second for keeping constant tabs on where Slifer's position was in Battle City. During the Battle City explanations, where Kaiba explains the anti-rule, Kaiba talks about his rarest card, which he would need to give up, and shows Blue Eyes White Dragon, where in reality, it would have been Obelisk. Now, I'm less confident in placing this as a cheat, but ultimately I'm deciding to put it as a cheat, because you could argue that showing a god card would completely change not just the number, but the quality of duelists who are willing to challenge him. It also means that Kaiba gets to keep Obelisk hidden from other duelists, which we can clearly see in his duel against a random duelist, where he pulls Obelisk out of nowhere, where if he at least showed it beforehand, then the duelist could have prepared somewhat. And don't get me wrong, as cool as Blue Eyes is, there's a world of difference from potentially getting a Blue Eyes compared to a card that practically auto wins the game the moment you summon it. To add another example to the ever expanding list of infractions Kaiba makes, as tournament organizer is the specific use of satellite scanning to translate Winged Dragon of Ra's effect. Again, this is Kaiba using access to information no one else has access to. No other duelist has the ability to use Kaiba Corp cameras to zoom into Ra, and use state-of-the-art machines to translate its effects. The important thing to note is that not revealing effects to your opponent is actually legal in anime. So Ra's effect being hidden was to Marik's advantage, and he wasn't obligated at any point to reveal Ra's effect, even if it never ended up mattering because he never dueled against Ra. Next up is the 4-way duel between Kaiba, Yugi, Joey, and Marik. While there isn't anything going on specifically in this duel, it's more to do with how Kaiba set up the duel. You see, it inadvertently favors Kaiba, and here's why. You see, the format of the duel is explicitly made by Kaiba, not even an independent adjudicator, which the referee even admits to.
Why don't I just go first?
Why don't you pay attention to the rules that Mr. Kaiba worked so hard to create?
And if we look at the special format's rules, you'll understand why. Because no other competitor knew about it beforehand, apart from, well, Kaiba. The turn order is specifically determined by each duelist taking out a monster from their deck and removing it from the duel, where the player of the highest attack gets to go first. While it sounds fair in theory, being a sort of risk-reward situation, where you either weigh the cost of giving up a powerful monster for securing your position, it still favors Kaiba's deck, considering the number of high attack monsters in Kaiba's deck in comparison to, let's say, Joey's. And even ignoring how this rule heavily favors Kaiba's deck, it's also unknown to any duels beforehand, which would have heavily changed the duel, given that other duelists could have brought high attack monsters to prepare. In fact, Kaiba even abuses this lack of preparedness, because the card he reveals is Masked Beast Descardius, a card he wins from the anti-rule, and is only used for the single duel, meaning that this was a card he took with specific knowledge that it would give him a benefit for the upcoming 4-way duel, which importantly would have let him choose who he was going to face off for in the semi-finals. Basically, the result is a format that Kaiba hand designed himself, kept secret, and then specifically exploited in a way that no other duelist could have known before or prepped for, which to me counts as much of a cheat in how much it favors Kaiba. So to answer the start of the video, how many times does Kaiba cheat? If we add up all the totals, it's 22 times. And given that he duels around 20 times in the anime, that gives him around an average of a cheat per duel, which really doesn't bode well for his claim.
There is no one on Earth who's superior to me.
So we now know that Kaiba cheats a lot, but he's not the only one. So if you want to see how many times his rivals gotten away with breaking the rules, I've got the perfect video for you.